For this final session on the DVD, what I want to do is I want to run through some synthesis and perhaps more importantly, the processing that you can apply on lead melodies. Now, I'll say from the start here that I'm not planning on having an incredibly in-depth look at synthesis here, since, well, there's as many different leads out there as there are different genres, and for me to try and make everyone happy and cover every single lead in existence, it'd take me around 9 DVDs. And on top of that, I don't think many of you've been in following along with our production series really needs that much advice when programming synthesizers now. We've looked at programming synths in synthesis, and we also looked at it in Fundamental 1, 2 and 3. So I'm hoping by now you've got a good idea how to do it, provided of course that you've been practicing what I've been showing you. I know I always bang on about that, but I really can't stress it enough. Watching me do anything here simply isn't enough. I can show you how it's done, but it's never going to replace you doing it yourself. As you practice and experiment, you'll find new things, shortcuts, new ideas, and like anything in life, the more that you do it, the better you'll become at it. So don't just rely on me to be here and do the job for you. I'll show you how you can do it, and I think in a way put you on the starting grid, but it's really up to you to do the rest. Now, if you are still struggling with programming synthesizers, especially FM or additive, then I will be going much deeper into those, certainly a lot deeper than I can in a single session in this DVD, for example. I'll be doing that a lot deeper in our upcoming release of Synthesis 2. So what I'm going to do for this session basically is just create a couple of leads, and they're going to be ones that I've had the most requests for, basically the leads that you lot have continually asked again and again and again how to create. I've been through all my emails and through a bit of the forums, and basically I've picked out a couple of different types of lead instruments. So what I'm going to do for this session is I'm going to create them in a synthesizer. And I think more important than that, though, is that I'll then show you just how important the effects and the processing are to create that final sound, how they can be used to help add some energy and some kind of drive to the music. And fundamentally, I suppose, it's the processing that's going to be important here. Basically, when we work with melodies, it is 70% composition, 10% synthesis, and that final 20% rests on your processing and your effects. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we'll start programming. The first lead has to be one of the most requested leads of all. It's how do you write that bright trance lead, that hands in the air, uplifting trance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by programming that timbre, show it's really not that difficult, and then I'll show how processing and effects are used to make it sound even better. Now, if you've seen the previous DVD, which I hope you have, you'll already know that certain synthesizers are suited to certain things. For example, Korg Triton, sat in my rack there. It isn't too great at producing trance timbres when compared to something like the one above it there, the Yamaha CS6R, or the one above that with the Access Virus. So it's always worthwhile choosing the appropriate instrument for what you want to write. Now, for trance timbres in the software realm for this, because filming outside software is a bit difficult at the moment, I actually prefer the V-Station over most other synths, because the saw oscillators in these are actually really nice saws, and it has a especially nice ring modulator as well. So what we'll do is I'll play this back. I've got a simple trance rhythm here using our techniques that I discussed throughout this DVD. So I'll play this back and we'll start programming a trance lead in this. Just turn that down a little. Right, well, I mean, first things first here. A trance lead consists of saws. It's got the bright soy timbre, but it also has a triangle in there, because the triangle will give it that brightness, that very top edge brightness that it requires. So our first oscillator we set to a triangle there, and then our other two will set to saws there and there, and I'll just bring those in. Turn it down a little bit more, it's getting a bit loud here. Right, the first thing we want to do is we want to detune these from one another now. First thing we do is you can hear there how it sounds, well, it sounds pissed. So what we do is now we draw back on this until we start to get it sounding a bit more stable. Sounding fairly stable there. So what we'll do now is we'll detune this one. Again, right away until it sounds just wrong. And then we slowly draw it back. Now I imagine this one's going to be closer to centre this. About there. Now we'll adjust our amp envelope now. We've got a general timbre there, so what we do is move over to our amp envelope and sculpt the timbre now. Our decay is going to control the pluck, so we need a fair pluck there. So leave our decay around there. Sustain, we want that pretty much full. So we get that length there, and then we just adjust that so the notes just join together. About there. That sounds okay. And the next thing we do is we drop our frequency down a little. Because what we're going to do is we're going to use our modulation envelope here to control this filter. And obviously if the filter's fully open, this modulation envelope isn't going to affect it. So we'll send that about there. And then we'll have a play with this modulation envelope here. We'll start the decay to add a pluck to it. And you'll hear the pluck appear, the filters kind of twang as we increase this. Hear it there. Now we don't want it too strong, about there. We'll leave the sustain on 0 and then we'll just bring this release up to keep the filter open. A little bit of resonance in just to bring that top end up at the cutoff point. We'll set this filter, a Q norm here, about halfway. Oops. Now the big secret here to these hands in the air kind of transforms recently has been ring modulation. You'll hear as we introduce this, it kind of thickens the timbre out a bit, gives it a bit more life, a bit more bite. We'll go about there with that. If we take that away. We'll just detune that a little, I think. Go. Now that's a very basic timbre there. I mean, if you listen back to that, it doesn't sound too great, but what we do now is we use processing to increase this. Now the first part of processing that we want to insert here is actually reverb. Now you may be asking why we want to put reverb on an insert here, and well, basically we want to use this reverb as part of the timbre. We're going to use specific settings in this to help create the timbre from this. It's going to be one and the same with this. When we come to mixing, we probably will put another reverb in and use that as a send effect, but for the moment we want to use it as an insert effect for this, just to help create part of that timbre. So what we'll do is we'll call up the space designer for this, I think. Now the trick with this is it's in pre-delay there. What we want to do is we want to set that pre-delay quite long, because what that does is that slows the reverb entering onto this. So it means that the transient of this instrument here will pull through before the reverb is applied. Now, if we had a 0 pre-delay on there, what would happen is the beginning attack of this will be covered in reverb as well, and that would push our lead instrument near the back of the mix, and we want to avoid that. So what we do is we turn our pre-delay up as far as we can, and basically that means that our attack will come through before the reverb here is applied, and that means that it'll keep it at the front of the mix so we can hear it. It pulls through the mix rather than being pushed into the background. And what we'll do is we'll start playing that back now. take that away and bring it back. Can you hear now, this reverb isn't pushing this to the back of the mix, it's just making it more prominent, it's making it sound thicker, a little bit thicker. So what we'll do, our next effect is going to be the, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Echo Boy. Now, the reason that we're applying Echo Boy here is we don't want to create an echo on this timbre because, well, basically our release is overlapping. So what we're doing is we're going to use Echo Boy to thicken the timbre even more. So what we'll do is we'll listen back to it, change that to 16ths, and then we slowly reduce this until it just thickens the timbre rather than actually applies a delay effect. Now, the next effecting line that we want to apply now is Filter Freak. Again, this will probably come as no surprise. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Filter Freak to add some modulation to this timbre. Basically, we're going to modulate the filter slightly. So what we'll do is we'll switch that up for full now, and I'll set that to a rhythm. Sync it to tempo. We'll set it over 2 bars, I'd say. And then we'll just exponential. And we'll just slightly off so it just rolls past our centre point. And we'll drop that frequency down a little and we'll just modulate it slightly and then just listen. The trick basically with our Filter Freak there is just to create a slight difference in the music, just a little bit of modulation, not too much, just a little bit of modulation that if we take it away we can notice, but if it's there we don't really notice, and that just helps maintain the interest in our timbre that's playing this. So I think the next one we're going to apply in this chain here will be the Transient Designer. Basically what we do now is we listen back to it and we can use our Transient Designer here to sculpt the timbre itself. So now what you've got to remember with this Transient Designer is one of the main reasons we want to use this is the more attack we give this timbre, the more upfront it's going to be in the mix. The sharper the attack, the more upfront. Remember that transients are so important when we're mixing. So if we add more of a transient to this, it will pull further towards the front of the mix. So what I'll do is we don't want to go too far back with our attack, otherwise we'll end up pushing it to the rear of the mix. We want to keep our attack quite close. And finally, what we want to put on this one is our SPL full ranger. And what we're going to do is basically we're going to use this to again play with the timbre of this riff here. Now the reason for that is that we don't want to use a parametric EQ. We want to use a paragraphic EQ because, well, parametric's too clinical. We use that when we want to, when we mix down, when we want to adjust the timbre to fit in with everything else. But for the moment, we want to sculpt the timbre quickly. So basically, it's best to use a paragraphic. We use this to very quickly sculpt the timbre rather than get too technical. So we don't need anything down at 40 or 90. Remember that a lead instrument's going to reside somewhere around there. Like that. So most of the energy up around 4K, 1 and 4K. There we go. Basically, that's the order of effects that would apply to a typical trance timbre. And in fact, most lead timbres we follow with the Space Designer, Echo Boy, Filter Freak, just had that little bit of modulation, the SPL Transient Designer, and the Full Ranger. Now, a further processor we can add here is actually the soft tube, the compression. And what we do basically with our soft tube is, we'll just call this on our Tube Tech CL1B. What we do basically with this is we adjust it so that the timbre is just breaking through our threshold, so we're applying it. We set a very fast release, and what we do is we adjust our attack so that the compressor sweeps in slowly, so more of the energy is at the rear of the timbre than at the front. Now, it won't particularly work on this timbre here, because if you look at our settings there, we've got quite a long release, so they're overlapping, so really our compressor will never get the chance to relax and reapply it, but we can use it in shorter, stabbier timbres. So I think actually what we'll do is we'll do that now. I'll do another timbre. I'll change what I was planning on doing. We'll do a shorter, stabbier timbre, and we'll use this Tube Tech, and I'll show you how you can use that to add some energy. So let's start by getting rid of all this. So what we'll do for this next timbre then is we'll program kind of an electro lead. Now, basically what I've done is I've written a typical electro pattern there, and as I mentioned in previous sessions, the electro's it doesn't remain within the octave, it kind of jumps. It'll jump between octaves to give it that glitchy type feel. If I just play this back. Well, honestly, it doesn't sound too great there, but we are going to create the actual timbre in here, so hopefully it is going to sound a little bit better. So what I'll do is we'll create the timbre first, and then we'll have a look at how we can affect that timbre, how we can work with it and apply processing to make it sound better and add that drive. So we'll get a basic timbre in here first. Now, obviously, the electro's based around quite soy type waves. A little weak, that we want something a bit dirtier. That's alright. Let's try another one of those. I like the sound of those. So that's them. What we'll do again is we just detune this one. We'll set it to the same as that one, and then what we'll do is we'll detune this to fight both those oscillators there, which is what electro's about. It's about oscillators fighting, so we're quite far with this. Fat up there. This our ramp envelope, just even get the right type of feel for it. What I'll do is go into our LFOs, and basically we'll detune this LFO. So around there. Pulse width modulation, just to get that horrible detuned effect. And we'll re-trigger that LFO over and over every time it restarts. So we've got this second LFO here. This third one detuned as well. Around the same. That's sounding a little bit better. A bit of glide on there, 16ths, so we get that sweep up that you can hear there as it glides between the two notes. And we'll keep that quite dirty there. Right, now again, first thing we can apply here is some reverb. Let's go for our space designer. And again, the important thing here is the pre-delay. Get the pre-delay right up there. Get our spread on full, get a nice thick timbre running. Such a long tail on it. And what we'll do next is we'll call up our Echo Boy. Again, this is to add thickness to the timbre. So we don't want that. We want it going away. So we'll set that to 16th. Slight amount of feedback. And all we do is we drop this down. Turn that up a little bit. And then perhaps unsurprisingly we come back to our filter freak again. We set that to a rhythm envelope, sync it to tempo. We'll do a slight amount of modulation here, not too much. And we want this as a faster modulation because it's quite a fast tempoed lead. And a little bit slower than that. Just that slight bit of modulation is going to give it that little bit extra interest. It's just like with the drums, as we did with the drums, that little bit of interest in there. Now what we do next, we call up our dynamics and we call up a noise gate. And what we want our noise gate to do is get rid of any bad reverb there. You know, that could be trailing over. We want it quite established. So we're using our noise gate now to cut off the space designer and the Echo Boy, so that if it was going to trail over, the noise gate stops that trail and we just have the direct notes. So that way we get the thickness of space designer, the thickness of Echo Boy, but we lose any reverb tails or anything like that. And again, we're going to our SPL. We'll call it the Transient Designer. And we give more definition to the front. And then go to our SPL full ranger. remember it's our lead, so we want a lot of the energy around here. See, we keep most of our energy around there because that's where our lead will sit in the main mix. And finally, we'll do is call up our compressor as an insert. Now we want our soft tube CL1B. And then what we do is increase our threshold so we can see our registers there. Quite a hard ratio on that. And then what we do is a very fast release, but what we do now is with an attack like that, the compressor will come in as soon as every note starts. What we want to do is we want the compressor to sweep in and give some dynamics towards the end of the note rather than the front. And what this does is this adds a bit more energy, a bit more drive to the music. Gives more of a sweep in on each note. Now obviously we don't want to go too mad there, because the problem is if we go too mad, people are going to be able to pick it out. We need to make it so that the listeners can't really hear it. If you take it away, it's noticeable, but if it's applied, you can't really notice it. So if you listen to that, and I'll start to take away all the effects we've applied. Can you hear the difference that they're all applying? Now, I said at the beginning of this session, this has just been a quick, brief run through of the synthesis because, well, there's just too many leads out there to make, and lead melodies always tend to be a very individual creative taste, in my opinion. Whilst the bass timbre is pretty much just a bass timbre, it's the lead instrument that labels your track for what it is, and therefore I always find it's an incredibly independent, creative thing to create. So what's more important here in this lesson, what I want to get into more importantly than the synthesis, is the processing, since that's generally more generic. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that everything I've applied here is the only way to apply it, because it isn't. The effects are going to depend on the type of sound you want from your music, but having said that, the modulation that we've applied there is becoming a de facto in professional leads. Without creating some modulation, some movement and some drive through the processing, your leads will tend to come across as quite weak compared to all the other dance records out there. But as I said, you must remember to keep it incredibly subtle too. You don't want to draw particular attention to your lead, otherwise it'll lose its magic feel. As I said, the best way to view it is that if you take the modulation away, you know it's missing. But if you leave it in, you can't really tell it's there. Just remember that composing a melody is 70% of the story, but that final 30% is down to the timbre and the processing. And of those two, it's the processing that's more important. A great melodic line will be ruined by a poor timbre, and a great timbre will be ruined by a poor melodic line. You've got to mix them all together, and that's where the theory you've learnt here must mix in with your own creativity. And I can never stress that enough. No great music has ever come from just copying somebody else's lead melody, their harmony, their bass, their drums. It's come from the artist. And that artist doesn't care what anybody else thinks. He just writes what he or she wants to hear. You see, the thing is, if you write music for other people, if you say, oh, I love Sasha's music, I want to copy his toms, I want to sound like Sasha, you'll never get anywhere. Now, if you write it for yourself and just let other artists become an influence to you, then you're on the road to being a true artist. And if you're good at what you do, your music will become popular. Just remember that all dance music genres out there are a result of the artists doing what they want to do. I mean, you got to think, if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have any of the genres today. So if you write something that doesn't sound like anything else, it's something you should be proud of. Play that out, let people hear it. If it's good enough, you could be responsible for starting a whole new genre of music.